The Appian Way is the queen of all roads. It stretches from the heart of Rome down to the heel of Italy, a monument to engineering and power. But in the spring of 71 BC, this road was not a symbol of glory. It was a symbol of horror. If you were a traveler walking that road, you would not see beautiful cypress trees or marching legions. You would see crosses, 6,000 of them. Every 40 paces, a wooden cross, and on every cross, a dying man. For 200 kilometers, the air was filled with the groans of 6,000 crucified slaves. This was Rome's message to the world. This is what happens when tools try to become men. But long before the crosses, long before the screams faded into history, there was a single man who made the masters of the world tremble in their villas. He was not a king. He was not a general. He was a Thracian slave whose name became a whisper of hope for the oppressed and a word of terror for the powerful. Spartacus. To understand the fire, we must understand the spark. Spartacus was likely born in Thrace, the wild lands north of Greece. History is hazy, but it is believed he once served in the Roman auxiliary army. He knew their tactics. He knew their discipline. He knew how the eagle hunted. But somewhere along the line, he deserted. He was captured, bound in chains, and sold. Not to the mines, which was a quick death, but to something worse. He was sold to Eludus in Capua, a gladiator school owned by a man named Lentulus Batiatus. In the modern mind, we see gladiators as celebrities, but in reality, they were livestock. Expensive, dangerous livestock. In the Ludus, Spartacus was trained to kill for the entertainment of the mob. He learned to suppress his fear, to ignore pain, and to accept that his life expectancy was measured in months. But Batiatus made a mistake. He filled his school with fierce men, Gauls, Germans, Thracians, and he trained them to be perfect killing machines. But he forgot that a machine with a soul is a dangerous thing. The revolt did not start with a grand speech or a strategic plan. It started with desperation. In 73 BC, about 200 gladiators planned to escape, but they were betrayed. The guards were coming. They had seconds to act. Spartacus and about 70 others didn't wait for weapons. They raided the kitchen. Imagine the chaos. 70 giants fighting off armored guards with chopping knives, meat skewers, and roasting spits. They fought their way out of the school, covered in blood and flour, bursting into the streets of Capua. On the road, they found a wagon carrying gladiator weapons. Now, armed with swords and tridents, they were no longer fugitives. They were a small army. They fled to the only place that offered protection, the sleeping giant, Mount Vesuvius. At first, Rome laughed. The Senate didn't send a legion, they sent a police force. A praetor named Claudius Glaber arrived with 3,000 hastily gathered men. He looked up at the mountain. The slaves were trapped at the summit. There was only one path down, and Glaber blocked it. He decided to starve them out. It was a logical plan against irrational men. But Spartacus looked at the terrain differently. He saw the wild vines growing on the cliffs. In the dead of night, the rebels wove ladders from the vines. They didn't come down the path. They rappelled down the sheer cliffs behind the Roman camp. While Glaber's men slept, confident in their siege, the gladiators attacked from the shadows. It was a massacre. The Romans fled in their underwear, leaving behind their armor and swords. This was the turning point. Spartacus didn't just escape, he humiliated Rome. News spread like wildfire. Slaves from the countryside, shepherds, herdsmen, and runaways flocked to Vesuvius. They didn't come for gold, they came for revenge. The army grew from 70 to 700. then to 7,000, and eventually to over 70,000 men, women, and children. But a large army is a hungry beast. They raided the rich villas of Campania. The masters who had treated humans like cattle now found themselves at the mercy of their property. Spartacus, however, was not just a brute. He showed remarkable restraint. He tried to organize this chaotic mob into a disciplined force. He divided the loot equally. He forbade his men from holding gold and silver. They traded only for iron and copper to make weapons. He was building a nation on the move. But with numbers came internal conflict. His top lieutenants, Crixus the Gaul and Oenomaus, wanted to stay in Italy and plunder. They wanted to burn Rome to the ground. Spartacus, perhaps wiser, knew that Rome could not be defeated indefinitely. He wanted to march north, cross the Alps, and send the men back to their homelands as free men. Rome stopped laughing. They sent 2 consuls, the highest elected officials of the Republic, with 2 full legions. This was war. But the slave army was divided. Crixus took a portion of the men and stayed behind to loot. He was intercepted by the Romans and killed. His army was annihilated. When Spartacus heard the news, he did not mourn in silence. He honored Crixus with a Roman funeral, but with a twisted irony. He forced 300 Roman prisoners to fight each other as gladiators to the death. The roles were reversed. The slaves sat in the stands and the masters died in the sand. Spartacus then moved north. He defeated every legion thrown at him. The path to the Alps was open. Freedom was within sight. History holds its breath at this moment. Why didn't he go? Why did he turn back south? Some say his men refused to leave the riches of Italy. Some say he became overconfident, believing he could actually destroy Rome. Whatever the reason, he turned back. It was the decision that sealed his fate. Panic gripped Rome. The Senate turned to the richest man in history, Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus was not a great general, but he was wealthy, ambitious, and cruel. He raised vast new legions from his own pocket. But his soldiers were terrified of Spartacus. They had seen the veterans of other legions slaughtered. Crassus needed to restore discipline. He revived an ancient, brutal punishment: decimation. He took a unit that had shown cowardice in battle. He divided the 500 men into groups of 10. One man from each group was chosen by lot. It didn't matter if you were brave or cowardly. It was pure chance. The unlucky man was then beaten to death by his 9 comrades. Clubs and stones. Friends killing friends. The message was clear. You should fear your general more than you fear the enemy. The Roman army suddenly found its courage. Crassus chased Spartacus down the length of Italy. He trapped the slave army in the toe of the boot, near the Strait of Messina. Spartacus had a plan. He had negotiated with Cilician pirates to transport his army to Sicily. If he could reach the island, he could ignite a new slave revolt and hold out for years. He paid the pirates. He waited on the beach. He looked at the horizon, but the ships never came. The pirates had taken the gold and betrayed him. Betrayal is a bitter poison. Now, Spartacus was trapped. Behind him was the sea. In front of him was Crassus, and Crassus was building a wall, a massive fortification across the entire peninsula, trapping the slaves like rats. Winter was coming. Food was running out. Spartacus attempted a breakout during a winter storm. They filled the Roman ditches with timber, dead bodies, and earth, and stormed across. Only a portion of his army made it through. The end was near. Another Roman general, the famous Pompey the Great, was returning from Spain. Another army was landing from Macedonia. The walls were closing in. Spartacus knew this was the end. His men urged him to flee, to save himself. But Spartacus was done running. He marched his depleted forces to meet Crassus head-on. He wanted to deny Crassus the glory of a long siege. The final battle took place near the river Salaris. According to the historian Plutarch, just before the battle began, Spartacus's men brought him his horse. Spartacus drew his sword and killed the animal. He told his men, "If we win, I will have many fine horses to choose from. If we lose, I will not need one." He was cutting off his own retreat. He would fight on foot, shoulder to shoulder with the slaves he had freed. The battle was chaotic and bloody. Spartacus didn't command from the back. He charged into the center of the Roman lines. He was trying to reach Crassus personally. He wanted to cut the head off the snake. Accounts say he killed 2 centurions who tried to stop him. He was a force of nature, driven by the fury of a man who would rather die than wear chains again. But the numbers were against him. He was surrounded. Spears rained down. He was cut in the thigh, fell to one knee, and continued fighting behind his shield until he was hacked to pieces. When the dust settled, the body of Spartacus was never found. He was likely buried under a mountain of anonymous dead, indistinguishable from the men he led. But Crassus was not satisfied with mere victory. He wanted to make a statement that would last for centuries. He took the 6,000 survivors, men who had surrendered, hoping for mercy, and he marched them to the Appian Way. The crucifixion began. It is a slow, agonizing death. It takes days. The victim suffocates as their own weight collapses their lungs. For 200 kilometers from Capua to Rome, the road was lined with the dying. Travelers were forced to walk between the crosses, smelling the rot, hearing the pleas for water. Crassus ordered that the bodies be left there to decay, a grim warning to any slave who dared to look a master in the eye. The revolt was crushed. Rome celebrated. Crassus got his glory, though Pompey stole some of it. The Republic stood for another 40 years before falling to Caesar. But something had changed. The fear of Spartacus lived on in the Roman psyche. They never treated their slaves with quite the same careless arrogance again. They realized that the tools could speak, and when they spoke, they could shake the foundations of the world. Spartacus failed to destroy Rome. He failed to return his men to their homes. By the standards of history, he was a loser. But why do we remember him? Why do we not remember the names of the generals who defeated him? Because there is something in the human spirit that resonates with the struggle for freedom against impossible odds. Spartacus proved that a man can be stripped of his name, his home, and his freedom, but he cannot be stripped of his will. He died as a free man on a battlefield of his choosing, rather than as a spectacle in an arena. Today, if you walk the Appian Way, the crosses are gone. The Roman Empire is dust. The temples are ruins. But the name of the Thracian slave still echoes. It whispers to us that freedom is not a gift given by the powerful. It is a right that must be taken, sometimes with fire, sometimes with blood, and always with the courage to stand alone against the world. The past whispers to those. We have reached the end of another journey, through the dusty pages of history. But the whispers of the past never cease. Subscribe to stay with us on this mysterious voyage.